Warlock is now afraid, gambling with both their lives. Decides to never Yoshi jump off of the NPC, and they destroy the 3 totems together. Skeleton loses power and falls into the boiler room of hell. The god of death is defeated. My face when my players all died and then decided to jump god as a Hail Mary. Hey, what's up everybody, I'm SkyDieRay and welcome to another DnDGreentext video. How are you guys doing? Hope you're having a wonderful day today. Before jumping into it, I wanna quickly kindly ask if you wanna take a moment to smash the like button. Takes a second and helps out a lot, so thanks so much for that. And with that being said, I hope you enjoyed the video. Rogue, the best trap detecting tools for dungeon diving. Be me, DM. Be not me, Tiefling Rogue, the only important PC for this story. Playing a homebrew campaign. The rogue's elf librarian friend found out that a bunch of demonology books are stolen from the library's chief's collection. An NPC tells the rogue at the local tavern to discuss this. The NPC is part of a church, quote-unquote, which is actually a cult for the fiend god of flesh and blood, and asks the player for a bargain. The cult will return the books, but the party has to raid the mausoleum of the Vanquisher, another god, and yes, the Vanquisher is dead, for them. The mausoleum contains a casket where relics of the Vanquisher can be found. His cloak, his boots, and his bow, to be exact. Party said yes. They didn't bother to roll for history, so I can't lore them, but it doesn't matter too much. Fast forward to the next day, dungeon diving. The party entered the atrium of the mausoleum, and there's a bunch of cultists there surrounding an altar. Rogue rolls pretty high, sneaks past them and enters the chamber with the casket. None of the other PCs can go with him due to lack of dexterity. Casket is placed on a taller platform, and there are 3 statues at the bottom by the flight of stairs that led to the platform. Rogue proceeds to get close to the casket. I described an obvious magical barrier surrounding it. Rogue throws a dagger at the barrier. Me, are you sure about that MP4? The rogue confirms. The barrier shatters and the rogue looks around the environment, makes a perception check and gets a decent result. The statue seemed to be slowly inching towards him. Rogue, they're pulling some weeping angels, then just turned back and continued. Rogue wishes to open the casket with his dagger. Me, you what? That MP4? Sure, why not? Mummified corpse climbs out. In the meantime, the party members fought the cultists and won. The corpse then seals the entrance they used with a fire barrier and initiative is rolled. The campaign was left in a cliffhanger since then. Stay tuned for what happens next, I guess. How my party died and jumped death. Be me, DM. Party consists of a British dragonborn wizard, a Goliath barbarian who's just Kratos, a Kokra monk, Warlock whose patron is her adoptive angel mother, barbarian wizard multiclass that is Starscourge Radan, and an NPC they adopted near the beginning of the campaign, running a homebrew campaign about killing the gods and becoming their replacements. Party is in a cave where the god of plague resides. Whole place reeks of rotten eggs. Navigate with light cantrip and the warlock's devil side. Cave and plague god are very Nargal inspired disease. Gross stuff, parasites and nasties everywhere. Party sees a group of miners mining crystals and then are attacked by monsters that ignore the miners. Only use homebrew monsters so players can never metagame with the enemy stat block. Fight proves difficult. Have realistic injuries. Wizard has his book arm chopped off. Rule that without his cheat sheet he cannot use spells but cantrips are fair game. Casts Firebolt. My face when me and the rest of the party understand what the scent of rotten eggs means. Describe how the fire ignited the methane gas in the tunnel and causes a massive explosion that results in a TPK. Have a house rule that when dead or unconscious, the party one by one have a small chat with the death god. The whole party spawns in purgatory about to be banished to heaven or hell. Barbarian has an idea. There's 6 of us and 1 of him. Let's jump the motherfucker. I love this idea. Barbarian walks up to God of Death, places his hand on the god's shoulder, looks him in the eyes and says a cheesy one-liner in a Hulk Hogan voice. Party rushes in to beat the MF. Battle begins. Warlock has no connection with the patron in purgatory. Warlock cannot use magic, so instead he follows the wizard, holding up his spellbook so he can cast. Beat the out of the death god. Reveal that they didn't kill the death god. They killed his secretary. Giant off skeleton appears, so large that he breaks the barrier between purgatory and hell. Party goes from to scared shitless in the matter of seconds. The real battle begins. Party spots totems made of bone on floating islands around the boss. Skeleton is immune to damage. Party figures they need to destroy those to kill the skeleton. let the party know that if they fail the dex check to hop on a platform, they fall into hell and die. Monk has one leg cut off, meaning she cannot jump, and her wings melted off to sustain the acid damage. Warlock leaves the wizard as he casts Arcane Hand to hold his book. Warlock rides the party NPC. NPC lost both her arms in the previous fight. Warlock ties the NPC's shield to her forehead so the NPC can headbutt shield bash. Warlock rides the NPC like Yoshi, hopping from platform to platform. Warlock: hey, if we fall, can I Yoshi jump off of her to save myself? Me: yes, but you have to call if you wanna jump before she makes the roll to jump. It's a 50-50 gamble. Warlock is now afraid, gambling with both their lives. Decides to never Yoshi jump off of the NPC, and they destroy the 3 totems together. Skeleton loses power and falls into the boiler room of hell. The god of death is defeated. My face when my players all died and then decided to jump god as a Hail Mary. Bobik and the Rot, the making of a spore druid. Bobik and the Rot. Most of Bobik's life was rather simple and uneventful. Like most turtles, he left his home young and lived a rather solitary life. But while most turtles live a nomadic lifestyle, Bobik liked to plant roots. He married his childhood love at the relatively young age of 17. Her name was Binda, and she gave Bobik's life meaning. They built a simple farm in the woods, and Bobik lived off the land, growing what he needed and fishing from the nearby river. Binda had a way with plants, learned some simple druidcraft from the local wood elves, and spent her days tending to her garden and filling the farmhouse with flowers. They hatched a number of children who went off into the world to live their own lives, as turtles do. The years passed, and Bobik and Binda had their good years and bad years, but isolated in the woods they lived a rather pleasant life. They grew old together. Life was good, until it wasn't. In old age, Binda was struck with a wasting illness. It was a long, slow, and painful illness, and as it progressed, Binda became too sick to work the garden, and the flowers disappeared from the farmhouse, and the quiet, peaceful happiness was replaced with anxiety and melancholy. As the loyal husband he was, Bobik stood by Binda throughout her trials and did what he could for her. He learned simple natural medicine from the wood elves and used it to care for her and ease her suffering. After years of misery, Binda finally was able to rest, and she was buried on the farm that they built their life around. The years of sadness and pain were too much for Bobik, and he could no longer stay on the farm. The flowers were gone, but the memories of Binda were everywhere. So Bobik decided to leave the farm. He ventured deep into a nearby swamp, built a shack, and decided that he would live out the remainder of his days there. The next chapter of Bobik's life is one of monotony, quiet contemplation, and reflection on a life well spent. The swamp was strangely devoid of life, and not much grew in it aside from various types of fungus. So Bobik spent his days foraging for and eventually growing mushrooms. The days, months, and years blended together in the swamp, and Bobik eventually lost track of how much time he had spent there. He knew he was rather old by turtle standards when he moved into the swamp, at around 55, and it was obvious he was turning into an old reptile and would soon die here in his little shack. He did not mind that, as it meant he would soon be reunited with Binda, and until then, the shack had all he needed. He had been so good at cultivating mushrooms that they seemed to overtake his shack. They grew out of the walls, the floors, and the roof. He no longer needed to even leave his little hut to feed himself. One winter, he developed a deep, rattling cough that soon became accompanied by breathlessness and fevers. He knew he would die, so he laid down in his bed, closed his eyes, and dreamed of Binda. It was a long, strange dream filled with lichen, mushrooms, molds, and spores. He dreamed that Binda was in his arms, and they were lying on a bed of fungus, but then she seemed to slip away from him, swallowed up by the mushrooms beneath her. When he awoke, he did not know how long he had been sleeping, but it was spring, the mushrooms were blooming, and he felt better and more alive than he had in years. Thus began the third chapter of Bobik's life. At first, it seemed like his life just went on the way it had before his illness, but he felt younger and more vibrant. He also did not feel so alone anymore. It was as if the mushrooms had become his companions, and he spoke to them to pass the time. One day, when he ventured out of his shed, he looked into a puddle, and in his reflection, he saw that he looked much older than he felt. He also noticed mushrooms growing on his shell. Lichens and molds spiraled around his limbs. Instead of feeling disgusted and strangled, he felt empowered and embraced. As time went by, he not only felt the presence of the mushrooms and felt strengthened by them, but when he spoke to them, he could hear them whispering back. As the years went, he got to know them well, and they taught him many things. They called themselves the Rot. They told him about the cycle of nature, about how all living things are split up between the green, the red, and the gray. The green is a force of nature that infuses all of the plants that grow from the earth. The green helps to feed and sustain the red, which is the domain of all living and breathing things. Both the red and the green feed the gray, which is composed of the mushrooms, fungus, and bacteria. The forces of rot and decay which nourish the earth, allowing the cycle to continue. They explained that these forces remain with a delicate balance, and if the balance is shifted too far, it can result in the end of all life as we know it upon display. They also spoke of another power that lives outside of the cycle and is feared by all three domains. This is the power of undeath, which breaks things out of the cycle, permanently weakening and sapping power from all three domains. They told him that occasionally, when there is an existential threat to the cycle, or when a being too evil or powerful attempts to bend these natural forces to its will, and the balance has been too dramatically shifted, an avatar will be chosen, which these powers of nature may work through. They told him that he, Bowick, had been chosen as an avatar of the Grey, and that the Rot would work through him to restore balance. They taught him how to harness the powers of the Rot, from the spores floating in the air all around us, to the yeast growing on our skin and within our bodies, to the slime mold under our feet. Through manipulation of the Rot, we can magnify our strength, heal wounds, and manipulate the very fabric of the world around us. One day, while preparing his customary evening meal of roasted mushrooms, he saw an animated skeleton shambling through the bog. Enraged and disgusted by this perversion of nature, Bowick sprang into action, grabbed his walking stick and ran towards the monstrosity. Before he was even close enough to strike, he felt the powers of the Rot flowing through him. He raised his arm, and fibrous vine composed of lichen shot from his arm, wrapped itself around the undead monster and pulled it into range. He then raised his staff and felt the power of the Rot flow through it. With one blow, he struck the monstrosity down. Then a voice rang out in his head, no longer a whisper, now clear as day. It is time. We are ready. The following morning, Bowick and the Rot pulled the heavy oak door from his shack out of its frame and fashioned it into a shield. He knew that it would be his duty to restore the balance to this plane, and he would seek out where that walking skeleton had come from, so he could return more like it to the earth, where they belonged. However, before he did that, there was something he needed to do. He finally understood that if life and death are just links in an endless circular chain, that there is no true death, just a change of state. He made his way to his old farm. It took him some time to find it, because without the care of Bowick and Binda, it had fallen into disrepair and was completely overtaken by the forest around it. The tiny farmhouse was little more than a mound of debris, covered in vegetation. It suddenly became clear to Bowick that he had been in the swamp even longer than he originally believed, and he wondered how long he had slept, quote-unquote, before the Rot brought him back. He walked over to the edge of the garden where Binda lay, and stood above her simple grave marker. Fittingly, several mushroom caps grew in the ground above her gravesite. Come, my love, we have things to do. With that, the mushrooms bloomed and released a cloud of spores into the air around Bowick, and slime mold climbed out of the dirt and up his legs. For the first time in years, he felt Binda's presence, and knew he would never be alone again. Now we are ready, he said, and he turned and headed back the way he had come. Okay, that was a surprisingly enjoyable story. Alright, on that note, that's it for today's video, so thank you so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to leave a like if you did, and subscribe for more if you haven't already. Also, thank you to everyone supporting the channel on Patreon, as well as on YouTube, so thanks so much for those. Links below if you want to check them out, as links to social media, Discord, anything else. And yeah, that's it. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Have a great day, bye.